Right, good evening everybody and welcome to 2019 and Happy New Year. I hope everyone's had a good Christmas and had a time to relax and recharge. First Cabinet meeting then of 2019. Apologies for absence, I think we've got one, John Miner. Thank you very much, Deb. Everyone else is here. Declarations of interest. Minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of December. Are those accepted? Thank you, Richard. Item 4 then is the financial management report. Councillor Lee Carter.
Yes, thank you, Lee. I'll be very brief. The report in front of us this evening demonstrates there'll be a net projected outturn position for this financial year, which is estimated to be within budget. That's after applying a small fraction of the 5.31 million that we made available to meet any unforeseen costs. In terms of those unforeseen costs, we're now hitting a period of the year where they could hit us in terms of winter gritting, winter pressures, and any costs that arise from safeguarding. There are still cost pressures in those areas. I would like to highlight the exceptional work of officers from right across the authority, though, in achieving this and maintaining this position that we set out. Is particularly positive given that there's been £7.6 million worth of savings that we've had to make to balance this budget. The main drivers for that positive position are excellent performance in terms of treasury management, the property investment portfolio of the council delivering a benefit greater than forecast. However, as I said, there are still cost pressures in children's safeguarding and education and corporate parity. I think that's all I'd like to say for now. I'd like to move all of the recommendations in the report.
Is that seconded? Second. Thank you, Richard. Any comments or questions from the group leaders of the opposition? Councillor Tomlinson?
Yes, we welcome the fact that a balance sheet is still some left over to go into the new financial year. Conscious that we're still in a period of, what did Theresa May say? She said austerity's ended, but I think it was recapped and austerity is going to end. We don't know when. Obviously, we're still potentially looking at cuts, but we don't know whether they are going to come to fruition, but we're having to plan for that for the next 3 or 4 years. I know that comes onto the budget, but it's always worth reminding ourselves that with the big safeguarding ones we have to have, with children's safeguarding, which is 2.7 million over budget, and I'm not arguing that that's not needed, because I'm sure it is, and adult social services also just about on budget. With those pressures increasing, and not just on us but all the local authorities, the net saving we're looking to make is what, about 24 million, which is just under the entire budget for children's safeguarding. So it's still scary that we're still trying to find these savings, and you know it's just, you know, enough's enough really. We can't keep having these cuts every year in, year out. But I really welcome what the authority's done, the revenue processes it's done, and I'm glad the outturn looks so positive.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from cabinet members?
Sorry about the 40,000 we had to spend on the church house. Aston pothole, really, I suppose. But certainly didn't help.
That's what contingency there for.
Absolutely.
All those in favour? That's all. Thank you very much. Moving on then. Item 5.
Thank you, Lee.
Yes.
I'd like to present the Service and Financial Planning Report for 2019-20 through to 2021-22, or as we call it, the budget. Last year, you will recall that we set a 2-year budget, and the report updates the medium-term projections, but also confirms a second year of that strategy in terms of the savings that will be required, but also additional investments that will be made into key priority areas. Just to recap, since 2011, the council has had to make £117 million worth of savings. Going forward to the end of this budget period, that will increase to £148 million. As a little bit of context, this year's grant from government will be cut by a further 30% by £4.3 million. That's seen a huge change to the way that the council operates and the demands upon our shrinking budget. In order to manage these cuts handed down from government, we've had to cut over 1,500 jobs. Staff, real terms pay is reduced by 25%. Senior and middle management numbers and back office costs have been cut by over a half. We've had huge savings achieved in major contracts that the council awards and operates, and big savings from cutting accommodation costs. In this current year, 2018-19, only 15 pence of every pound of our net revenue budget now comes from the government grant. But doing just that alone wouldn't have been enough. we have had to diversify the way that we've operated the authority. We've had to invest in growth, generate commercial income from many new sources, maximise income from existing sources, and invest in partnerships with local towns and parishes and other organisations, which has kept open every library and community centre in the borough as an example. Had we just gone down the route of finding efficiencies and making savings, we would have had to introduce emergency financial measures to the authority without a doubt. And we've seen that happen in both Northamptonshire and other authorities. And we've also seen authorities like Barnet, who pursued very early on an easy council model, struggle. In terms of other income examples that demonstrate that our strategy of investing in growth and generating commercial income is paying off and is helping our revenue budget, we've seen growth in areas like business rates and council tax, income from new homes bonus, income from examples like the solar farm, which is generating over £200,000 per annum, income from New Place, £1.2 million, £1.5 million from the growth deal, and jobs on top of that, and our commercial income, services income, now stands at over 19 million. We've also understood the importance of investing in culture, sports and the arts and generating civic pride. There's been some very tangible benefits of that, including the growth in volunteering, for example, where now nearly 1,000 individuals volunteer on council-specific programmes. We've also maintained things like grants to the local food bank, and grants to support and assist the Citizens Advice Bureau. Both of those tangible examples of the impact on our society and our community that nearly a decade of Tory austerity has had. Of the 8 budgets that have been presented by the Labour administration since 2011, we've achieved 8 years of balanced budgets, but none of the budgets that we've set previously have been set amidst such uncertainty, and this weighs heavily on our ability to plan for the future. The government, for example, have yet to issue instruction as to how local government will be funded beyond 2020, and of course there is still the indecision over what exactly exiting the European Union will look like, and by extension what impact that will have on Telford and Wrekin. In terms of our current year, as I reported earlier, we're on target to be within budget despite 7.6 million of savings. That's mainly due to Treasury management, but also investments in our property portfolio, which are performing better than expected. In terms of the budget presented before you today, it's a strategy that requires a further 6 million of savings or new income, and that will come from further efficiencies or generating that extra income. In terms of main highlights, there will be an extra £3.3 million for children's safeguarding, £800,000 for adult social care, and £300,000 to maintain subsidised bus routes. In terms of capital investments that we set out last year, £50 million for road and transport improvement, which is the single biggest package ever announced by Telford and Wrekin Council in terms of that investment in infrastructure, £30 million investment into local schools, £28 million for the expansion of New Place, £19 million for the Growth Fund, and £9 million for the Newport Innovation Package, including Nye Park. We've also set aside £3 million of one-offs to support the budget. In terms of council tax, 3.2% increase was agreed last year. All of that money will go into adult and children's services. However, we will maintain the lowest council tax in the West Midlands and amongst the lowest across all of the unitary authorities in the country. Just as a bit of context, the cost of not having those increases in line with other councils is over £8 million to us. However, we've always understood that the burden for bridging this cuts gap that's been left to us by government has had to be borne not only by the local taxpayer but also our own ingenuity and creativity. I would draw people's attention to 15.8 of the report, which is the council's intention to exercise powers to increase the council tax premium on long-term empty properties in the borough. They currently number some 143 dwellings. In terms of the next steps, there'll be a consultation which will end on the 3rd of February. A report will be brought back to Cabinet on the 14th of February, and obviously we go to the budget meeting of the Council on the 29th of February. I'd like to move all the recommendations contained within the report.
I'm happy to second from the Chair. Any comments or questions from the group leaders, opposition leaders? Councillor Andrew Reid.
Well, yes, as Councillor Card said, it's the second part of a 2-year budget. And there are parts of what he said that I do agree with. We do need clarity over the resetting of business rates nationally, which may affect us one way or the other. It may be for the better, it may not. At the moment, we simply don't know, and we do need to know. The same applies to local authorities keeping a greater proportion of business rates. and of course the clarification around new homes bonus, which Councillor Carter did mention, which from memory I think brings in about 6 million or so to the authority. Now, I for one welcome the ending of the revenue support grant. I nearly called it the rate support grant then, it's showing my age I think, and hope that it will significantly reduce the historic central government interference in council affairs and services, although I may be somewhat optimistic in that thought. I also welcome at last the government green paper on adult social care, and look forward to hopefully for a radical shift in the way that we provide funding for adult care. Any potential opportunity to join up adult social care with the NHS, I think, has got to be welcomed, and that's something that we should actively pursue as a local authority. And of course, in continuing to look forward, we have the delights of the comprehensive spending review to look forward to. Couched, of course, in the term that, as has been said, austerity is coming to an end. Now, I, for one, certainly hope that it has. It does. I think we've reached the end of a long journey, which has forced local authorities to look at what they spend and how they spend it. And we come back to the 117 million. That's year on year. It makes you wonder what this authority was doing, and of course, all of the authorities across the country. Now, as I mentioned before, this is the second part of a 2-year budget, and I note that we're in a much better position than predicted by Councillor Carter last year. That's despite inordinate expenditure around celebrations of Telford 55 and of course the good old laser show, which I'm sure nobody will or has forgotten. We have an underspend to carry forward of about 5.3 million, a 580,000, that's nearly 600k payment from National Business Rates pool, and one-off still left to the authority of around 16 million, all of which has been significantly helped, of course, by additional government grants for highways and social care during the course of this year. Now, it does bring me back to the point, really, what on earth have we been doing, spending 117 million year on, year out, that we no longer have to spend? It really does beg the question of local government and what it's been doing. It's something that's been allowed to grow like topsy, and it is right that that expenditure has been brought back under control. Although I do say again, quite clearly, I think we've reached the end of that particular path. I, for one, forecast pretty well how severe it was going to be to a point. I didn't realise or think it would carry on in the way it has done, but we have reached that end. And I think it's testament to the officers of this authority and the way that they've controlled the budget and run the finances. And I think when you look around, and there's been mentioned one or two other authorities, and I'm not going to name them because there are authorities politically on all sides that are in trouble. This authority here has done particularly well, and I think it's weathered the storm particularly well. And what we should be doing now is looking forward to a different future, a different funding regime, and with the challenges that that brings forward. And that's something that I don't think we should be shying away from. We should be looking forward to it. And as I've mentioned before, anything that hopefully, and I mean hopefully, keeps central government out of local authority business and finance, then I suspect the communities will be all the better for it.
Councillor Tomlinson.
Well, the one thing I definitely would say, which is partly reiterating what I said before, is that even if we got a comprehensive spending review, what we could really do with from the government is a steer that says we're going to change our mind, austerity will come to an end, and wherever the comprehensive spending review comes up with, it's going to leave all local authorities pretty much with no further cuts to have to make. Because there really isn't much left to cut now other than services. In fact, I would go further than that. I'm really pleased that this council's tried to innovate in terms of business opportunities, particularly with regards to investing in or helping companies come into the area and invest in jobs, giving us extra business rates, giving us rental incomes, which has helped the coffers. It has led some local authorities that may not be as astute as our local authority to make decisions, certainly on purchasing properties outside of their boroughs or even into retail properties, which must have seemed a good idea at the time. But they won't be, and it's partly because the desperation that the government have said is just unleashed local authorities to go ahead and do this, which some aren't very good at doing. Now, thankfully, and I think it was backed up by our council's auditor, we have been fairly astute in what we've done. And in the money we've spent, it's primarily, in fact, it's 100% been spent in the borough to try and achieve investment within this borough and not gone outside. So I really, really welcome that. But the bold fact is, the bold fact is, if the government carries on with the strategy that it's told it's going to do, not just for us but for the rest of the country, we've still got to make substantial cuts. And even with the innovative ways that we are looking at revenue, I think we can't make any more. Now, it's a bit late now to probably adjust the Local Government Finance Act, which has already been passed. But I would make that plea, which I know the leaders have made before, that gearing ourselves up and way past the election, coming around to next autumn when the next Local Government Act comes in, that we would really ask our MPs, if they're still there, and the general election hasn't got rid of them, but whoever's there, let's just say, whoever's there coming around to that time, that they must really stand up now for the people that they have been elected by and say, look, you simply can't take any more from local authorities. It's not the goose that keeps loading the golden egg. It's got no more to give. And I'll reiterate that. And I know I'm as boring as I can be, but that's really it. We can't keep on. The local authority has to try and look at this year on year, because it's not always completely sure what it's going to get. And looking at the cuts it has to make year on year. But trying to look beyond that as to where we're going to find 20 odd million, it's frightening. So I would more than happily write to our MPs with everybody else's support to say, whatever your persuasion is, can we just say that enough's enough? We cannot have any more cuts. Council tax can't bring it in. I mean, we're trying to minimise the council tax impact of only 3.2, and we'll be one of the lowest around. But a lot of the councils are going to opt because they're absolutely desperate for a maximum of 3 on the one, 2 on the other. That'd be 4.99, and I should imagine that's going up and down the country. How can you go to the local public, who a lot of them are on low income, they're really struggling, and you say, well, we're going to have to put your council tax up 5%? It's just immoral. And not only that, we're going to do less for you. And not only that, we've still got to try and fund the priority services of adult and children's social services. And we would be shot, and quite rightly so, if we said to everyone, oh, we can't support all the kids now that have had issues, and we can't support those adults anymore because we haven't got the money. It's just wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Anything else? Councillor Overton?
Yeah, I mean, I do find it a bit rich that Andrew talks a good game on this, because every time this administration's been innovative and talked about new place, solar farm, it's been an attack by the Tory opposition at this council, not saying we shouldn't, the sun doesn't shine and all the rubbish we have at council meetings. And the fact that he talks that all these cuts, people's jobs have been affected by these cuts, real people have been made redundant by these cuts. And I got elected to serve the people of this town, and I care about people. I don't want to see, food banks increasing year on year thanks to Tory austerity, and I don't want to see people losing their jobs. But unfortunately, Andrew, it seems like you do. Well, I care about people, and that's why I'm on this side of the administration and you're on that side, because as a Labour person, I believe that people should be valued and supported and not just have their jobs cut just because a government comes in with an idea of cutting back on council services and making cuts to local authorities. We have done an awful lot in this last 4 years and in 8 years and the years we've been here to try and protect those most vulnerable people, and we continue to do it. And that's why I'm glad when we go into this election we have shown the power that we've had to do the best for the people of this town, and we'll continue to do it.
Yeah, Bill, I'd like to echo what you've said about officers. I mean, the reality in terms of having to deal with these draconian cuts has been left down to our officer team to deal with, and to ignore the fact that we are asking our officers to do so much more with so little is to ignore exactly the effect of these cuts on our people. The reality is we are trying to keep people safe always, and that has always been our priority. Our most vulnerable people in this town are our priority, and it's harder and harder for us to do that. What's changed, and Andrew, you might be interested in this, what's changed is our inability to deal with the preventative work that we used to do. We've cut huge amounts of preventative work that we did with partners, with ourselves, because it's not our statutory duty.
So to suggest that we were wasting money before is really, really quite incredible, that you would use that as your argument against this authority.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Councillor Overton and Watling have said, that this is about people working together, officers particularly, have worked extremely hard, innovatively, to make these savings. And I remember when I was in adult social care, how we went round and tried to do things differently, close things, rebuild things, and get people into shared lives rather than into, in homes and that sort of thing. So an awful lot of innovative work was done, and then we have to thank the officers for their work, because they have been. The other thing, a couple of things, is that there's the opportunity cost of unemployment. Right? You transfer the burden onto other type services like unemployment pay and benefits and food banks. We don't see that. We just see the savings. But it's also the Business Winning Council. An awful lot of work has taken place to bring business in, the house building, the developments that have taken place that have helped to increase the income to the council. All that work is, I wouldn't say unseen, but it's not noted in these reports, the work that's been done, the leadership from cabinet members and the leader. So there's been an awful lot of work. One thing I will mention, and people who know me, I've been a great advocate of using other people's money. I've always argued this. How can we get grants for this, that and t'other? And I know Councillor Carter has been to Westminster to try and generate some interest in redeveloping our Newtown estates, which were built for 1 car per house, and now there's 2-3 cars per house, as parking is very poor. And it's not just the Newtown estates, it's in other places, right? And it's how we go about bringing in income to regenerate our Newtown estates. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but I'll just finish on my first point. It's the officers here that have done the work and made things happen, and we must congratulate them.
I also think it's about controlling our own destiny, and often words are easy, actions are harder. And if you look at some of the things that this council has delivered since 2011, which puts us in the position that we are in, for example, the creation of New Place, the solar farm, the growth fund, the extension of the property investment portfolio, the ability to go out and get businesses to come to Telford, to grow in Telford. All of those things have needed people to put their hands up at full council meetings and vote for. And we know it's a matter of record that things like New Place, the growth fund expansion, the solar farm have been criticised and voted against by some councillors in this council, and those would result in further cuts. If we did not have New Place, if we did not have the property investment portfolio, if we did not have commercial services, that would result in further cuts. And those people who have pledged to sell off New Place, to sell off a whole range of different income generating enterprises, would have to find more cuts to aid this authority to settle a balanced budget. And my big frustration is that, and I said it on the radio today, that we've been criticised for protecting the front line. For people to say that you can take away £117 million and to welcome £117 million through the revenue support grant to be cut, to welcome £117 million to be taken from your own council, is something which I think is bizarre. Because actually, if you talk to all councillors, council leaders across the whole of the country, regardless of their political persuasion, they will talk about the need for a revenue support grant. They will talk about the need for certainty on income generation. They will talk about the need for services. And the Conservative-controlled and Conservative-led Local Government Association have been very articulate in the concerns that they've put aside about children safeguarding, children being at risk because of lack of resources, adult social care. We only have to look at our own hospital and A&Es over the winter to see what impact those cuts have had. And I've got to say that people who feel that taking £117 million away from this council hasn't made any difference at all, they live a life that doesn't require the council services. Because I can tell you, my ward, where there are 600 kids turning up to breakfast clubs in the summer holidays, they certainly need a council to support them. And then just finally, in terms of Telford at 50, I was very clear when we set out in that particular journey that it was completely honourable for people to say that they did not support the project of celebrations for Telford at 50, whether that be the events that we took took place or the projects that have been delivered. But you cannot have it both ways. You cannot have it that you vote against that funding, you criticise that funding, you ridicule that funding, and then turn up to ribbon events where that funding is being used to deliver projects and services. I'm afraid that there has been Conservative councillors who have been hypocritical in the extreme, that have turned up to events, turned up to projects, issued press releases welcoming investment that's come from a fund that they opposed, and even tonight you've heard ridiculed. So it's not about politics, it's about personal integrity. And I do hope that people can look at themselves in the mirror and assure themselves they're not being hypocritical, even if other people can say that they are. Councillor Carnty, do you want to say anything?
No, nothing more really than just to finish on. I didn't include it before, but it doesn't mean to say I've ignored it, and it's reiterating what everyone else has said, that pride in public servants who've delivered us to this position, and they've done so. It's not been easy. They've created business initiatives, ideas, income generation streams that have sometimes ended up on the front of a newspaper because a certain group of people haven't agreed with that or say it's the wrong thing to do. All of the decisions they've taken almost unanimously have ended up in a position we are now where we're still fighting, and we can still look forward with some hope and some positivity, despite the fact that the government funding position is going to get really, really, really grim. I, for one, don't welcome the end of our tax going to London and not being returned to pay for services that we all rely on. I also don't think that £117 million worth of cuts is something to be celebrated. However, what I do welcome is, I think for the first time in probably 8 years under this Labour administration, is that parties of all colours are now rallying behind the notion that this authority has done well, and I welcome that.
Well said.
All those in favour? That's all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ken. Moving on to item 6, which is the civil parking enforcement powers. Councillor Richard Overton.
Thank you, Sean. Civil car parking enforcement is the enforcement of illegal parking in areas, for example, such as on yellow lines, disabled parking bays and on school keep clear markings. Illegal parking is currently enforced by West Mercia Police and is currently a criminal offence. Should the council decide to adopt these powers, illegal parking will attract a civil penalty. The Cabinet report I presented in May 2018 outlined the actions we needed to take in order to apply for these new powers. A decision to apply was made following the leaders' positive discussions in February last year with the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner, who has agreed to provide £200,000 of transitional funding for the first 4 years of the council taking on the powers. That funding is in addition to funding the council already provides for car parking enforcement on council-owned car parks, and is further complemented by investments made by a number of town and parish councils into car parking and environmental enforcement in their respective areas. All of this investment pulled together, plus the income anticipated from a lower number of parking fines issued compared to other councils, will mean the scheme overall is cost neutral, whilst providing the illegal parking response our residents have been asking us to provide. As part of our application to adopt these powers, we are required to undertake consultation to inform our scheme and to help identify legal parking hotspots across our borough. Over 1,000 people responded, outlining their main concerns, including illegal parking outside of many of our schools, problems with on-street parking and the misuse of disabled bays. The results are available in Appendix A of the report. We also received formal responses during the consultation period from Mr Campion, the Police and Crime Commissioner, formally asking for the Council to take on these powers, and in doing so supporting the police to concentrate their resources to tackle serious and organised crime in our borough. In adopting these powers, we plan to recruit an in-house team of 5 enforcement officers to address illegal parking across our borough. I want to stress that we will not be using an outside private firm for the enforcement role. By having an in-house team, we can ensure they adopt an education-first culture with enforcement as a last resort. We will definitely not be one of those councils chasing an income target, and our officers will not be given targets to meet, unlike many other schemes across the country. Our new enforcement officers will also hold powers to tackle other environmental crimes, such as fly tipping, littering, as well as parking enforcement. I want to reassure Cabinet this is not a money-making scheme. If we were to be in a position where we have issued more parking fines than expected, then any additional monies has to be spent on highway-related improvements, such as improving safer routes to school, improving off-street car parking, and helping to maintain free car parking on many of our council-owned car parks. Discussions with the Department of Transport, who are the body who grant these powers, have confirmed that due to their work on Brexit, they are not able to consider any requests for the involvement of these powers until at least the summer of 2019. In preparing to adopt these powers, the Council will be reviewing all our traffic regulation orders from February onwards to ensure we can take lawful enforcement action against those who continue to park illegally. We also have to develop a parking strategy, and in doing so, this will allow us to reaffirm our commitment to maintaining free parking on many of our council-owned car parks. I hope Cabinet will see the benefit of the Council adopting these powers. We are often contacted by local residents on many occasions wanting us to tackle illegal parking in their locality, and this leads to some frustrations when we say we can't take action as we don't have the powers. I also believe that local residents appreciate the police have greater priorities in tackling more serious crime than parking enforcement and are supportive of the Council adopting these powers. I therefore move recommendations 2.1 to 2.5 for Cabinet approval.
That's seconded. Thank you very much, Arnold. Any comments or questions from the bill?
Yeah, we had a presentation long ago, oh bless you, from the Police Crime Commissioner and from the Chief Constable, I think it was, or Assistant Chief Constable. And it just concerns me that I'm happy for us to do this, don't get me wrong, and I think someone needs to do this, because what's happening is people just, they're almost getting used to flouting the law almost. They're parking on double yellow lines, sometimes in hazardous areas, and they know full well no one's going to do anything about it. And it undermines authority, it undermines people's perception of what they can and can't do. And I think the police have got such a difficult position. What did they have? They said to us, about 5 years, 2011, they had 1,500 officers, and now they've got just about 1,000, and they're hoping to get another 100 more in. So austerity has hit the police to the point where they can't police. And this is a smaller issue, I know, in terms of their priorities, but it's still an issue, and it's still a dangerous issue for individuals. But it's not just that, it's the tip of the iceberg for them. They can't even turn out for most calls, they can't reassure people, they can't do this, that and the other, because they haven't got the resources. So similar to us, they are really, really struggling. And then we try and take the initiative and take it upon ourselves to do it. We're told by the government they haven't got the civil servants because they're still trying to work out Brexit, so they can't even look at it for another. So I welcome this, I welcome what we're going to do, and I welcome the fact you're not just going to make them as traffic wardens, they'll be enforcing many other issues. I mean, many other residents, they get so, concerned about simple things like, littering, like dogs pooing everywhere and all that sort of stuff, and people want people to be stopped to do this. So I welcome this, just sadly it's got a delay.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Reid, anything for yourself? Yeah. No. Councillor Arnold, England.
Yeah, could I just mention two things? 1.3, the first line, recommendation to take these powers been assisted by £200,000. Again, going back to my using other people's money, transition funding for 4 years, so I expect that will cost us very little or nothing at all to implement for the first 4 years. And then in 1.4, I'm very pleased that it's not chasing fines. It's not fine driven. We don't have that culture. Right? And also, I've had these discussions with people in the past that, don't walk past a fly tip. Yeah, report it, officers. Yeah. So it has a much more beneficial effect on the borough. And all right, dog fouling, yeah, that's something else. But but fly tips, litter, abandoned vehicles, which is a risk, can be potentially a risk to people because yobs might set fire to them, and they look unsightly. So it's a much wider thing than just issuing fines to people for bad parking, which we need to control, particularly in the market towns. Right? I've been aware that that there are problems, but it's the holistic view and the funding using other people's money, and I think someone did a bloody good job. Angie.
Any other comments, questions? That's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? That's everybody. Thank you very much. Okay, then we'll move on to item 7, which is the school funding formula. Councillor Shirley Reynolds.
Thank you. The report you see before you today concerns the Dedicated Schools Grant. It's allocated to local authorities by the Department for Education, and it's usually in 4 blocks. Schools high needs, early years and the central school services. The schools block is calculated using the number of pupils the preceding October census and therefore different for each local authority. Our 1920 allocation is 117 million. The high needs block uses a combination of historical allocations and a national funding formula, and ours for 1920 is 22 million. The early years block is calculated by the average pupils in the relevant 2 January censuses and then multiply this by a unit of funding. Ours for 1920 is 12 million. And then the central school services block, again calculated by a mixture of historic expenditure levels and a number of pupils. The grant was introduced in 1819 at a much reduced level, and our 1920 allocation is only 1 million. Whilst I truly welcome the increase in funding, which represents the 13th largest increase out of 152 local authorities, this has to be considered in context. We are receiving such a large increase only because of the chronic underfunding in previous years, and it will take at least a further 2 years for the increase to be fully implemented. Currently, there is great concern in the system regarding the inadequacy of the high needs funding allocations from the Department for Education. This has been further exacerbated by the rise in the age of support from 19 to 25 years. This, together with the increasing numbers of children and young people with high needs, is leading to all local authorities struggling with insufficient funding. The Department for Education has responded with some additional funding allocation for local authorities, and whilst this is most welcome, sadly it does not meet the current funding pressures on high needs budget, and it has taken this government 8 years to recognise this funding issue for all local authorities. The school block funding allocation to local authorities is moving towards a national funding formula, which is benefiting, as I've said, Telford and Wrekin schools. Whilst on the face of it, it appears good news, it must be borne in mind, as I previously indicated, the increase is only so high because the provision has previously been seriously underfunded. I am, of course, pleased for our schools, and it does provide vindication of our long-standing belief that the mainstream funding for Telford and Wrekin has been held at an unjustifiable low level by the Department for Education. Local funding formula for 1920 has been discussed with the Schools Forum in September, and it was agreed that we should continue the continued move to the national funding formula as more funding is allocated by the Department for Education, but our administration has promised that a local minimum funding guarantee of 0% per pupil, which offers more protection than the -1.5 set nationally. We want to ensure that all children across Telford and Wrekin receive a fair protected settlement and that no school will experience a decrease in funding per pupil. I therefore recommend this report to Cabinet, and I thank all our officers for their hard work in ensuring the children across our borough will continue to receive funding which we have protected by our local minimum funding guarantee, and this will prevent any year-on-year reduction in funding and offer more protection than what is being set nationally.
Thank you, Shirley. Mr. Reynolds, any questions or comments?
Yeah, well, curious about that. I certainly welcome the additional money for high needs funding. That's 840,000. That's a substantial amount of money, and it makes quite a difference. We then go on at 5.3 to talk about the minimum funding guarantee. There's a statement there which says an MFG minimum funding guarantee set at 0% means that no school will experience a decrease in funding per pupil. And then there's a caveat saying subject, which you didn't mention, to the possible top slice outlined in paragraph 5.4 below. So I wonder if you could tell me, I accept that we're waiting for census figures which are due to be released in any time, what schools are actually going to be affected by that top slicing and will actually experience a decrease in funding per pupil from this authority?
Thank you, Councillor Reid.
Yeah, we are actually going back to the school forum in February. As you say, yes, we do welcome the 400,000, but that actually doesn't cover our budget of 570,000. So if you look at that straight away, very welcome money, but it's 170,000 less than what is needed. Now, we have worked out the funding formula, which I'm sure Heather will be able to give you much more detail on, and that promise of the 0% funding. Am I correct in that? If you'd like to just give the detail, Heather.
We had quite late notification to the additional funding for high needs.
So what we haven't done yet is rerun what the potential budgets are going to be for each school. And I think
when
if
did that come through then?
just before Christmas.
Yeah.
Um,
It's really late.
My finance officer's on leave at the moment, but that is something that we'll be looking at because we have got a school forum meeting in January. So we do need to run it through the formula for each school. I think the issue here is that unexpected and obviously very welcome additional funding for high needs does take quite a significant amount of the pressure off our immediate overspend on that budget. And at this moment in time, I think I would be very surprised if any school saw any decrease, because I think that sentence was in there before we've added to this about the additional top-up funding.
So the caveat was left in?
It was, yeah,
Effectively,
it
right.
was left in,
Okay.
and I'm quite happy to come back and share with members what those budgets will look like for schools.
Okay.
Bill, sorry.
That's all right. The clarity I wanted was the fact that it is good news. Well, is it good news we've been underfunded in the past? Probably not really.
No, that's
but
not good news, Bill. That is the problem.
it's good news we're getting the money now, but we're not, because we're getting it, you know, what we're dampener or whatever they used to call it in the old days. Like you're only getting it every now and a bit. And when I looked at last year, 2.7, I'm thinking, well, if that's only 2.7 on the base figure that we had in the previous year, surely when you take into account inflation, teachers' pay, heating costs and everything else, in real terms, it's probably not an increase at all. I don't know what the national pay awards are for teachers, but is that over above inflation? Or so can I ask that question? Is this over and above inflation, or is it
The
just...
Teachers' Pay Award is being funded centrally by the DFE.
So will that come out of this money that we're getting?
No.
Oh, that's...
No.
I feel a bit more
But
cheerful
you're
now.
absolutely right. There are other pressures, and of course, you know, you're running to stand still. But I think the good news for us is that over the 3-year period, there will be just under 7%. So it does mark something of a catch-up. Yeah. We're not where we ideally would like to be, but I think it does represent.
Shortchanged to the extent that we were being shortchanged.
That's right.
Or should be
Bottom of
shortchanged.
That's it in
Yeah.
essence.
Well, what a fantastic thing to welcome. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? So everybody, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay then, moving on to our final item, which is the declaration of the Dawley Pools and Pit Mounds Local Nature Reserve. Councillor Minor is unwell, so I've asked Councillor Overton to take this report, please.
This report is to approve the declaration of Dawley Pools and Pit Mounds as a local nature reserve. This is the 15th local nature reserve we will now have in our town. This cabinet has approved a number of local nature reserves, and of course linked into our green guarantee, this must be the greenest administration ever in Telford Wrekin. This means we'll have 515.36 hectares of local nature reserves in our borough. The Dawley Pools and Pit Mounds includes Castle Pool, the Dandy, Wide Waters, Furnace Pools and the Springe. The area supports the only known site in the borough for Mare's Tail and also has one of the largest recorded populations of great crested newts. There is lots of community support for this nature reserve, and this has seen lots of volunteers get involved, which also supports our 5 ways to wellbeing. Concepticals are local residents have been working hard with the Borough Councillors Jane Pinter and Andy Burford to help support the declaration, and the Friends group are currently being constituted, which will of course help in supporting developing the site in the future. I'm happy to move the recommendations 2.1 to 2.2.
I'd be happy to second, given the area. Any questions or comments? Councillor Tomlinson?
Just welcome it, really. I think any moves in this direction is the right thing to do. Something I'd support, absolutely.
Good.
Yeah,
Tomlinson?
I'm more than welcoming, because we've got the one in Shawbert to after a local nature reserve. We're even looking to expand on that, because there's green spaces in Shawbert, which I thought, well, instead of setting up yet another nature reserve, if we could tack them on, have them as wildlife corridors throughout, that'd be great. So I was going to have a chat to Mark Latham about that a bit later on. No, I welcome it, and I also welcome the fact that you're trying to work with the Telford Steam Trust as well, because obviously they had a great sort of potential tourist spot there, and try and work, you know, which a lot of steam trusts have to do these days with the local authorities. Great, so I'm happy with that.
Brilliant. Just want to say thanks to Dawley Hamlets Parish Council and Great Dawley Town Council for working with Concepta, Jane Pinter and Andy Burford in particular, to along with residents and officers. I think for me 1.4 is a really important paragraph. Often we hear people talking down our town and our borough, but 1.4 really does demonstrate how fantastically green we are as a borough in comparison to other areas of the country. and I'm really proud that our administration since 2011 have prioritised protecting the green space and the creation of local nature reserves, because it's so important that as we go from a new town to a young town, that we are protecting this green infrastructure for future generations to come. That's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? That's everybody. Thank you very much. I'll call the meeting to an end. Thank you.